should be a very, very interesting interview. Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson is in the studio. Reverend Peterson, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Now, Reverend Peterson, you have your own radio show. You also are the head of Bond, a brotherhood organization of a new destiny. What is Bond all about?
It is the purpose is to rebuild the family by rebuilding the man. We're celebrating our 20 years anniversary this year. We have a home for young men that we bring in from around the country. We show these guys how to overcome anger, finish school, find jobs, start businesses. We encourage them to get married before having children out of wedlock. We also have an after-school character building program with boys from 10 to 18, and we tutor them, counsel with them, help them finish school and move on in life. And the reason that we started Bond is because I realized that not all, but most black Americans are suffering not because of racism, but the lack of moral character. You have 70% of black babies born out of wedlock, black-on-black crime out of control. The average black person can't think for themselves. They're looking to someone else to think for them. And so we're trying to get them back on track by restoring the family, getting them to drop their anger and take responsibility for themselves.
All right, you started out non-controversial. You're going to help kids. Yeah, that makes sense. Help them pull themselves up by the bootstraps, et cetera. You're conservative. It makes sense. Yeah. Sean Hannity's on the board of Bond, et cetera.
Right. I do want to say, of course, I used to be a Democrat, but when God changed my heart, I went to him and apologized for being a liberal Democrat. He forgave me, and I became a conservative.
Okay, all right, good for you. I'm glad God reached out to you. So, of course, you got a little controversy there when you said that most blacks in the country are, how did you phrase it?
They're suffering due to the lack of moral character.
Lack of moral character.
Right, and not racism.
Jesse, you see how that might be a bit of an offensive charge for most black people in the country.
Well, only to those who hate the truth. When you love the truth and you hear it, it changes your heart, you appreciate it. But if you're in denial and you hate truth, then you become upset about it.
Why do you think they lack moral character?
Well, because 50 years ago or so, the government came in and it became the daddy of the family. And they told black people, we're going to take care of you, you don't have to worry, but you can't have a father in the home. And for some reason, they said yeah to that, and they took the fathers out of the home. Most black people.
No. Who said you can't have a father in
the
your
government
home?
did. Under Lyndon B. Johnson.
They said the black people in America, you cannot have a father.
No man in the home. If you want to receive a welfare check, if you want the government to take care of you, you can't have a father. And so
but Jesse,
many of them said yes to that. And so the government became the daddy, and the so-called black leadership became the head of the folks. And it's been downhill ever since.
Social Security not only applies to the elderly, but it also applies sometimes to the widows of the disabled, et cetera. I mean, there was when it was initially formed. I'm not sure that encourages people to have their husbands killed in war. I mean, I think the idea of the welfare was that if you don't have a husband and you really, or you don't have a father figure, to help the kids, because the kids didn't do anything wrong.
Well, that wasn't.
I don't think it's telling the kids, hey, don't have a dad.
Well, we're not talking about Social Security, but we're talking about welfare checks. And the government told them that they cannot have a man in the house. And I know many cases where, even if they had a man, whenever the worker would come around, social worker would come around to check on things, they would hide the husband or hide the boyfriend. He would have to leave home. So it appeared that they did not have a man in the home.
So, Jesse, here's the thing. If you say that winds up having an unintended consequence, okay?
Yes.
They set up this system, and it was they wanted to do the right thing, help out people who need the help, but it turns out if you say, hey, we'll only give you this money if you don't have a man in the house, then that sets up the wrong incentive.
Yes.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, okay? And part of the reason that welfare reform was done. But that's a big jump from that to then hence black people don't have moral character.
Well, I mean, any common sense thinking person would know that having your children out of wedlock is immoral. Kids who don't have two parents in the home tend to suffer more. They drop out of school. They end up committing crimes. They feel unloved by both parents in many cases, but especially the father, and creates an emotional disaster for them in their lives. And it wasn't like that prior to the government takeover of black Americans.
But do you see that when you say blacks lack moral character, or most blacks do, that it seems like you're blaming them and that you're saying it's their fault, and but I'm failing to see the logical connection.
Well, it is their fault. I mean, no one made them go to bed with a man without being married, or a man with a woman without being married. No one made them not, stay together, get married, and take care of their
But
family.
you're saying the government
They are deciding
by giving
to
them
do
the
it.
wrong incentive.
Well, the
So
government.
shouldn't you blame the government and
No,
leave
I can't. I mean,
black
it was
folks out of it?
it was wrong to allow the government to come into their lives, and that they allowed the government to come in
And
and
does
take
welfare-
over. But even they are responsible for that. We are adults. We are responsible for our actions.
Okay, now there's several other elements to this. Number one, doesn't this also apply to white folks? I mean, there's a lot of people in rural America and non-rural America that are white that take welfare and then they don't have that, et cetera.
It does.
So why don't they lack moral character?
Well, and they do. Those who depend on the government, they're not getting married. There are more people as well. But with black Americans, most people are afraid to tell them the truth for fear of being called a racist. At least white Americans are. And then their black leaders are not going to tell them the truth because they want them brainwashed, dumbed down, and demoralized so that they can use them for their own personal gain. You can't use a moral people. You have to demoralize them in order to take control.
Chapter 2, How We Missed the Mark. How we have arrived at the present state of affairs can be understood only by studying the forces effective in the development of Negro education, since it was systematically undertaken immediately after emancipation. To point out merely the defects as they appear today will be of little benefit to the present and future generations. These things must be viewed in their historic settings. The conditions of today have been determined by what has taken place in the past, and in a careful study of this history, we may see more clearly the great theater of events in which the Negro has played a part. We may understand better what his role has been and how well he has functioned in it. The idea of educating the Negroes after the Civil War was largely a prompting of philanthropy. Their white neighbors failed to assume their responsibility. These black people had been liberated as a result of a sectional conflict out of which their former owners had emerged as victims. From this class, then, the freedom could not expect much sympathy or cooperation in the effort to prepare themselves to figure as citizens of the modern republic. From functionaries of the United States government itself and from those who participated in the conquest of secessionists, early came the plan of teaching them freedom and of teaching these freedmen the simple duties of life as worked out by the Freedmen's Bureau and philanthropic agencies. When systematized, these efforts became a program for the organization of churches and schools and the direction of them along lines which had been considered most conducive to the progress of people otherwise circumstanced. Here and there, some variation was made in this program in view of the fact that the status of the freedmen in no way paralleled that of their friends and teachers, but such thought was not general. When the Negroes in some way would learn to perform the duties which other elements of the population had prepared themselves to discharge, they would be duly qualified, it was believed, to function as citizens of the country. Insomuch as most Negroes lived in the agricultural South. Moreover, and only a few of them at first acquired small farms, there was little in their life in which any one of them thought could not have easily understood. The poverty which afflicted them for a generation after emancipation held them down to the lowest order of society, nominally free, but economically enslaved. The participation of the freedmen in government for a few years during the period known as the Reconstruction had little bearing on their situation itself. They did not join with the uneducated poor whites in bringing about certain much desired social reforms, especially in giving the South its first plan of democratic education and providing for a school system at public expense. Neither this inadequately supported school system nor the struggling higher institutions of a classical order established about the same time, however, connected the Negroes very closely with life as it was. Neither this inadequately supported school system nor the struggling higher institutions of a classical order established about the same time, however, connected the Negroes very closely with life as it was. These institutions were concerned rather with life as they hoped to make it. When the Negro found himself deprived of influence in politics, therefore, and at the same time, unprepared to participate in the higher functions in the industrial development which this country began to undergo. It soon became evident to him that he was losing ground in the basic things of life. He was spending his time studying about things which he had been or might be, but he was learning little to help him to do better the task at hand. Since the Negroes believed that the causes of this outward condition lay without the race, migration was attempted, and immigration to Africa was again urged. At this psychological moment came the wave of industrial education, which swept the country by storm. The educational authorities in the cities and states throughout the Black Belt began to change the course of study to make the training of the Negro to conform to this policy. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, continuing my reading of Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro. This is the book we voted on. Of course, you know this is what we're reading. This is chapter 2. What's the name of the title? How We Missed the Mark. Chapter 2, How We Missed the Mark. And of course, you already know we got our notes and we're getting into it with our notes. And so we have our chapter focus. We have our key points. We have our the main argument of Carter G. Woodson, and then we have our closing thought for the video. So if this is your first time, we do our best to break these chapters down and really get into it of what the author was talking about and how relevant that is to what we're experiencing today and how what was happening then when this book was written and the time that this book was written in, and how does all of that still affect us to this day as Black people in America, as oppressed people in America, right? So key points: failure of leadership after emancipation. We're getting a bit into that. Misplaced educational priorities, right? So I'm linking that to Jesse Lee Peterson, right? Imitation of white institutions, Jesse Lee Peterson. Neglect of the masses, that go back to what he was saying at the end, because he did make a point, but that don't mean we be listening to him. He did make a point, but he also represents the imitation of whiteness. Dependence instead of independence. The misguided pursuit of assimilation, that is Jesse Lee Peterson. The need for a rethinking of education and leadership, right? These are our key points. And so let's jump to the chapter focus real quick, right? So Woodson explains how efforts at uplifting the Negro after slavery often missed the mark because they were based on imitating white models of success rather than developing programs and institutions rooted in the realities and needs of Black people. And that goes to one of the points that Jesse was making, right? So once again, Jesse is the example of the imitation of whiteness, but he had a few points. And one of the points was, the Black people choosing to be on welfare, even though welfare was also pushed on Black people. Welfare was given to Black people at a time where Black people had been made desolate by America. America wasn't giving out jobs to Black men. America wasn't really giving Black people a chance at anything in mass. And so welfare came as a savior for a lot. Now, that does not give, that's not making an excuse for anybody choosing welfare. But at the same time, what it does highlight, though, overall, is Black people didn't choose to do us. We chose white daddy. And so that helped to produce people like Jesse Lee Peterson, who now wants to actually be white daddy. Right? So that's the connection in all of that. A broken clock is right twice a day, but that don't mean we use the clock. So I'm not saying listen to Jesse Lee Peterson, but I'm saying he did have a couple of points why he himself is a part of the point. See how that works? And so let's get into our first key point: the failure of leadership after emancipation, right? After slavery, many Black leaders looked to white models for guidance on progress, right? So what are the white people doing? Because we need to do what the white folk are doing, because what the white people are doing is working, not understanding the mechanisms that went into building what the white people have off of the backs of Black labor, stealing Black inventions, right? Remember, it's not like White people woke up one day and said, you know what, we gonna make life better. And they just did it off their own marriage. No, man, government handouts. Like, and that's the thing too. Jesse Lee Peterson and others on the right, people like to talk about government handouts, but they often grossly overlook all the government handouts white corporations and white people have been getting from the government from the get-go to help them get on their feet. The government has been pulling white people up from their bootstraps from the beginning. So let's not overlook that. The government does it in public. They don't even hide it. They bail out white folk and corporations all the time, right? So affirmative action, you know, government aid, it's not just on black people. It's mostly white people, right? So instead of, I just want to make that point. Instead of building independent institutions and self-sufficient communities, they pursued assimilation into white society, which I think about every city have that black community or that formerly black community that have the history that it existed. Then after, civil rights movement and integration, which was really assimilation, all of that is gone because black people chose whiteness. So once again, that produces people like Jesse Lee Peterson, who not only chooses whiteness as far as to spend his money, but he chooses whiteness as far as his mindset. Jesse Lee Peterson, when he looks in the mirror, he sees a white man staring back at him when he looks in the mirror. He's totally assimilated. Jesse Lee Peterson is the epitome of the Negro that's been talked about in this book, especially the epitome of the Negro that was talked about in Black Skin, White Man's. Jesse Lee Peterson is black skin, white brain. This meant that the needs of the black masses were neglected in favor of pleasing or gaining acceptance from the whites. See, that's one of the points that he has, but he also participates in that. Yeah, you remember they all have their little nonprofit group and all that stuff there to cover up to make it seem like whatever, but everything they do go into propping up and making sure the white masses have what they need. But our black leaders, but we talked about this before. We talked about this in our lectures. We talked about this in some of our readings, right? Dr. Clark talked about it. Malcolm talked about it. Leaders who were given to black people, but it also goes back to the masses of black people who are blind and foolish followers. Black people, we are insane, but we are insane because of the system of white supremacy and how Negroes have been programmed to exist in this country. And so that's why it's on us to re-educate ourselves and throw off those chains. That's why I do feel it's important for us to read the book, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naeem Akbar. I'm just throwing that out there. Next time, I will put that in the book list, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Naeem Akbar. That is a book we need to read. So let's get back into this reading. We are, mine is different, so I don't really know what page this is, but this is chapter 2. All right. So I'm starting at the chapter where it says, or the paragraph where it says the missionary teachers from the North, because it's a bit different. This PDF that I have, I'm reading from, it's a bit different setup in the book, but it's still chapter 2. So make sure y'all hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. I'm just talking. I'm getting into this information. I done got into it. Hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. Of course, you know, shadow banning is being going on. So hit the notification bell. Every day at 1 o'clock, a video will be available on this channel. Every day at 1 o'clock. So just make sure you check out the video every day at 1 o'clock. Come to the channel and then watch everything on the channel. That's how we do it. That's how we break through the shadow ban. Let's get it. The missionary teachers from the North in defense of their idea of more liberal thinking, however, fearlessly attacked this new educational policy, and the Negroes participating in the same dispute arrayed themselves respectively on one side or the other. For a generation thereafter, the quarrel as to whether the Negro should be given a classical or a practical education was the dominant topic in the Negro schools and the churches throughout the United States. Labor was the most important thing of life. It was argued practical education counted in reaching that end. Practical education counted in reaching that end. And the Negro worker must be taught to solve this problem of efficiency before directing attention to other things. So that was the idea. Let's make the Negro focus on frivolous stuff rather than things that actually matter to change his life. So Carter G. Woodson is getting at the point that education should be used to help us solve our problems, just like Dr. Amos Woodson, right? Said that last week, just reiterating that point. Others, more narrow-minded than the advocates of industrial education, seized upon the idea of feeling that although the Negro must have some semblance of education, it would be a fine stroke to be able to make a distinction between the training given the Negro and that provided for the whites. Insomuch as the industrial education idea rapidly gained ground, too, many Negroes, for political purposes, began to espouse it. And schools and colleges, hoping thereby to obtain money, worked out accordingly makeshift provisions for such instruction, although they could not satisfactorily offer it. A few real industrial schools actually equipped themselves for this work and turned out a number of graduates with such preparation. And so that's good, right, as far as the industrial part. But it's still like, it goes back to the argument of the intellectual versus the industrial. Which route should the Negro take? I've always been in the school of thought that we should take both. We should prioritize both. The industrial should not be prioritized over the intellectual, and the intellectual should not be prioritized over the industrial. So let's get into another key point. Misplaced educational priorities, right? So education was directed at producing professionals who imitated whites rather than leaders who served the Black community, going back to what I was saying earlier. So the intellectual, develop more intellectuals. So come to us today, most Black people in America, most people in America, but we're focusing on us, but most people in America, but most Black people in America do not have the practical survival skills of human beings, myself included. And that's sad, because we focus too much on expanding ourselves as intellectuals rather than making ourselves well-rounded as human beings. How do we survive? How do we do the basic thing of surviving so now we can go up to thriving? We don't even know those practical things because the miseducation. We were sent to college to develop our brains, but we didn't develop anything else. The educated Negro was trained to escape his community, not uplift it. Get away from the other Negroes, because we all know Negroes do things wrong. So don't do anything with Negroes. Go get your education. If you have to get a Negro education, get a Negro education. Get that Negro education and go work for whites and go live around whites. Matter of fact, HBCUs actually teach their students to do that. Everybody loves HBCUs, but we don't like the outcomes that come from them, though. Schools focus on abstract knowledge rather than practical training that can solve economic and social problems facing Black people. Because we can theorize it, but we can't solve it. And that's the problem. Everybody got the answer, but nobody can do anything about it. Unfortunately, however, the affair developed into a sort of battle of words. For in spite of all they said and did, the majority of Negroes, those who did make some effort to obtain an education, did not actually receive their industrial or classical education. Negroes attended industrial schools, took such trainings as was prescribed, and received their diplomas, but few of them developed adequate efficiency to be able to do what they were supposedly trained to do. The schools in which they were educated could not provide for all the expenses with machinery which white apprentices trained in factories had. Such industrial education as these Negroes received then was merely to master a technique already discarded in progressive centers. And even in less complicated operations of industry, these schools had no such facilities as to parallel the numerous processes of factories conducted on the plan of the division of labor, except what value such training might have in the development of the mind by making practical applications of mathematics and science. Then it was a failure. Now listen to this. The majority of Negro graduates of industrial schools, therefore, have gone into other avenues, and too often into those for which they have no preparation whatsoever. Some few who have actually prepared for the industrial sphere of self-improvement likewise sought other occupations for the reason that Negroes were generally barred for higher pursuits by trade unions, and being unable to develop captains of industry to increase the demand for persons in these lines. The Negroes have not opened up many such opportunities for themselves. During these years too, the schools for the classical education for Negroes have not done any better. They have possessed on the basis that every ambitious person needs a liberal education, when as a matter of fact, this does not necessarily follow. The Negro trained in the advanced phases of literature, philosophy, and politics has been unable to develop far in using his knowledge because of having to function in lower spheres of the social order. Advanced knowledge of science, mathematics, and language, moreover, has not been much more useful except for mental discipline because of the depth of opportunity to apply such knowledge among people who were largely common laborers in towns or persons on the plantations. The extent to which such higher education has been successful in leading the Negro to think, which above all is the chief purpose of education, has merely made him more of a malcontent when he can sense the drift of things and appreciate the impossibility of success, envisioning conditions as they really are. It is very clear, therefore, that we do not have in the life of the Negro today, a large number of persons who have been benefited by either the systems about which they have quarreled so long. The number of Negro mechanics and artisans have comparatively declined during the last 2 generations. The Negroes do not proportionately represent as many skilled laborers as they did before the Civil War. If the practical education which the Negroes received helped to improve the situation, so that is to say, no worse than what it is, certainly it did not solve the problems as it was expected of it. And so, get back to the key point. Imitation of white institutions, right? And this is our 3rd key point. Black institutions, including churches and schools, often copied the structure, style, and philosophy of white institutions. I'm gonna read that again. Black institutions, including churches and schools, often copied the structure, style, and philosophy of white institutions. They copied everything of the white institutions. They wanted to exist like the white institutions. So the churches and the schools. So that's how you get black skins, white masks. That's how you get totally whitewashed. Black people like Jesse Lee Peterson with totally whitewashed brains. Instead of being centers of liberation, these institutions reinforce the idea that progress was measured by how well one could assimilate into whiteness. If it ain't white, it ain't right. This imitation left little room for creativity, independence, or self-definition. Left little room for creativity, independence, and self-definition. We gave that up to have white people take care of us, to have white people like us, to take crumbs off the table of white society. We gave up our freedom and our ability to self-actualize. Just marinate on that, though. Just marinate on that a little bit. Because it was more important. It's more important to be loved by white people. It is very clear, therefore, that we do not have in the life of the Negro today, a large number of persons who have been benefited by either of the systems about which they have quarreled so long. The numbers of Negro mechanics and artisans have comparatively declined during the last 2 generations. The Negroes do not proportionally represent as many skilled laborers as they did before the Civil War. If the practical education which the Negroes received helped to improve the situation, So that is today no worse than what it is. Certainly it did not solve the problem as was expected of it. I'm gonna read that again. If the practical education which the Negroes received helped to improve the situation so that it is to say no worse than what it is, certainly it did not solve the problem as was expected of it. And we can see that today. There are more Negroes today getting degrees than ever, but our living conditions, social conditions, civil conditions, all our conditions are some of the worst that they've ever been. Have more Negro millionaires, more Black millionaires than ever, but the masses of people are hurting. On the other hand, in spite of much classical education of the Negroes, we do not find in the race a large supply of thinkers and philosophers. One excuse is that scholarship among Negroes have been vitiated by the necessity for all of them to combat segregation and to fight to retain standing ground in the struggling of the races. Forget the masses. It's all about me. So we're gonna degrade the process. We're gonna degrade everything that could help to make us better for white acceptance. And that leads us to this fourth point, neglect of the masses. The educated Negro leadership often ignored the conditions of the Black majority who needed economic and social uplift. Let me read that again. The educated Negro leadership often ignored the conditions of the Black majority who needed economic and social uplift. Because I got to get mine. I got to get the bag. We rich. We making $100,000 out here. But the white man, yeah, it is the white man, but you also support the white man. Leaders focus on symbolic progress. What did Dr. Amos Wilson tell us about that, right? Titles, degrees, and respectability, while the majority remained in poverty. Hey man, I got my degrees. I got 3 degrees, bro. These white folk pat me on top of my head. You know what I'm saying? Tell me how such a credit to the race I am. And I like it. I smile. Show them all my teethuses. Because I love when the boss pat me on the head. Wilson criticizes this disconnect between the talented 10th and the ordinary people, the talented 10th, the untalented 10th, the incapable 10th, the unskilled 10th, the uncreative 10th, the unimaginative 10th, the unable 10th, right? What more to say? What more to add to it? What have they done? What have the talented 10th done truly, tangibly? And no matter what realm they're in, we're not just talking about boule, bougie people. We talk about you back to Africa people too. We talk about you regular Black people too. We talking about Black people from all walks of life. You talented 10th Negroes. You dashiki wearing talented 10th Negroes too. You shea butter, natural hair, bamboo earring, dashiki wearing, African dancing, Ifa practicing, African drum dancing, African dancing Negroes who still assimilate to white culture. Black skin, white brain. On the outside, they look African. You talk Black, but you live white. So that leads us to this next point, dependence instead of independence. By missing the mark, Black leadership fostered dependence on white society. Instead of developing their own systems of economics, education, and culture, Black people continue to rely on white validation and resources. Crumbs are better than being able to break our own bread. This dependence perpetuated subordination, even when Black people had access to more formal education. But the white man's is better. I want to be like the white man, because the white man's everything is better. Comparatively, few American Negroes have produced credible literature, and still fewer have made any large contribution to philosophy or science. They have not risen to the heights of Black men farther removed from the influences of slavery and segregation. For this reason, we do not find among African Negroes a Pushkin, a Gomez, a Jeffrey, a Capitan, or a Dumas. Even men like Ronald Hayes or Henry O. Tanner have risen to the high levels by getting out of this country to relieve themselves of our stifling traditions and to recover from their education, from their miseducation. And so he's saying, you know, we've had some, but we ain't had a lot of people too. Like out of all of this intellectual pursuit, we have nothing that can help us rise out of this. We have nothing that reshaped or reformed thought out of these intellectuals, right? Now, we have had brilliant people, but I'm not sure that we would put them in this intellectual class, of this bougie intellectual class, the 10th intellectual class. You know, of course, you know, our Neely Fullers, our Dr. Amos Wilsons, our Francis Cress Welsons and stuff, they wouldn't be put in that bougie talented 10th class. Some may put them in that class, but I wouldn't. But I get his point on that though, right? We got all this intellectual pursuit, but nobody can intellectualize us out of this oppression. And why not? Is it a lack of being able to, lack of know-how, or a lack of want to? Or is it a combination of all of it? The misguided, this is another point, another key point. The misguided pursuit of assimilation. Many educated Negroes believe that the ultimate sign of progress was becoming accepted by whites. If the white man loved me, then I've made it. Black famous, white famous. Black rich, white rich. This belief led to the rejection of Black history, culture, and identity. I don't want none of that blackness. That's how you get Jesse Lee Petersons. That's how you get Jesse Lee. Because Jesse Lee talk about Black people like he's not Black. He's fully assimilated to whiteness. He's just a pet. Wilson stresses that true progress cannot be found in assimilation, but in building a system that serves Black needs direct. And white people would never give us that. The last key point is, and I finished the chapter too. So I finished reading chapter 2. It was a short chapter. So, this last key point, rather, the need for a rethinking of education and leadership, right? Woodson argues that education must be redirected towards self-reliance and service to the Black community, rather than trying to intellectualize ourselves into white spaces. Leaders must stop imitating white society and instead focus on organizing, educating, and uplifting the masses. But leaders have to give a damn to do that. Without the shift, Black leadership will always miss the mark and fall in its responsibility. But Black followers will always line up behind the leaders. So we all stupid out here. So Woodson's main argument for chapter 2 is Black leadership and education after emancipation missed the mark by imitating white models of progress and neglecting the needs of the Black masses. Instead of fostering independence and self-reliance, they foster dependence on white institutions and approval. True leadership in education must be rooted in the realities of Black people and aimed at serving and uplifting their own communities, our own communities, Black communities. And the closing thought, Woodson's wake-up call to Black leadership, right? He shows that the educated Negro cannot claim success while the masses remain oppressed, because we're not solving our problems. The real mark of progress is not the imitation of white society, but the ability to build the ability to build independent Black institutions, culture, and self-sufficiency. That's why we watched the Independence Day Project given to us by the brother Carl Tone Jones. So I'm gonna read that again. Woodson's wake-up call to Black leadership. He shows that the educated Negroes cannot claim success while the masses remain oppressed. The real mark of progress is not imitation of white society, but the ability to build independent Black institutions, culture, and self-sufficiency. So what we gonna do? Well, we already know what we're gonna do. But for those of us who give a damn, this is what we are. This is what it is. We got the information. Are we gonna use it? Got the information. Dang it, are we gonna use it? That's how we do. The Miseducation of the Negro link is in the description to get your copy. If you don't have your copy, if you have not read this book, you need to read it. Of course, listen, watch these videos, read along, all of those things. But read the book for yourself. And read it and read it and read it like once a year. Man, we doing this thing, man. I love that we over here reading books and learning. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm applying. I'm applying it in my everyday life. Applying it at work and even in my own life. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. So hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. This is On the Shoulders of Giants. We ain't going nowhere. We're going to only get bigger, better, stronger. I'm almost at 100,000. We about to hit 100,000. This is the premier channel to get your information for Black people who actually really want to do something real in the community. Real grassroots people. This is the channel. This is the spot. We the #1 spot for that. I don't care what nobody else tell you. We the #1 spot for keeping it real. Make sure that we talking about real stuff that's relevant to what we got going on today and not fluffing on stuff. I ain't saying we always got the answer. I ain't saying we always get it right, but we do our damn best. All right, so hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and share. This is how it go down over here. So if you're not watching On the Shoulders of Giants, I don't know what you watching, but you tripping. Love y'all. I'll catch y'all next time.